Hey everybody, Who's Your Jedi here with another review for you. And this time I'm talking about episode 22 of season 1 of Ultimate Spider-Man called The Iron Octopus. Now, before I get into the episode itself, we need to have a quick little talk. This is I'm going to talk about something that I did cover in my last channel update, but since this is one of the video review series that's going to be most affected by what's going on, I want to talk to you about it again here real quick. And that is basically that now that the fall TV season has kicked off in force, literally half a dozen shows that I review are going to be dropping every weekend. And just like I'm sure everybody else out there, I'm out there doing things on the weekend. I'm really not home very much on the weekends, so I'm simply not going to be able to do like I did this week and drop half a dozen reviews in one day. I'm just not going to be able to keep up that pace. Now I'm going to try and get these reviews out in a reasonably timely fashion, but please don't send me messages saying when is whatever review going to be out. The answer is, and it will always be, it comes out when I get around to it. I'm sorry, guys, but real life has to come first. And one other thing, if you want to contact me, now let me try that. If you have a question or a comment about a particular video, it's cool. Just leave that in the video that you're talking about. If you have something you would like to say to me personally, just cruise by my channel and you can send me a private message there. But please, if you have a question or something about what's going on, don't leave questions in the comment section of videos that have nothing to do with what you're talking about. That's just cluttering things up, and I'm one of those people that clutter drives me absolutely crazy. So please do not do that. So with that said, let's get into this particular episode. So we start off on a very upbeat note, getting to see Peter and Harry hanging out, being buds, playing video games. And Peter's suffering yet another loss. He's been skunked by both Harry Osborn now and by Aunt May. This time Harry playing as none other than Deadpool. Peter, of course, plays as Spider-Man. And apparently Peter, either Aunt May and Harry are really good, or Peter is just really sucky at video games. Which is kind of sad, since seeing as how Spider-Man actually has a pretty decent history, at least in modern times, as a video game character. I mean, have you ever played, like, was it Marvel vs. Capcom 2? He has, like, the coolest super attack in the whole game, Maximum Spider. Well, at least in my opinion. But anyway, so Peter does get his butt kicked by Harry there. During the relevant conversations that happen later on, I guess I I can't talk. So of course there's the whole thing with Doc Ock showing up and attacking them. I'm sorry, the Iron Man robot. The Iron Man armor controlled by Dr. Octopus showing up and attacking them. And we do get to see a pretty good throwdown between Spidey and the armor. It's a very intense, very good action scene. And I do like it because it shows that Peter can compete on the same level as Iron Man. Now, when we saw that big team up with him and Tony Stark earlier, Tony was very much here in the mentor role. Here in this episode, he and Peter are really fighting together as equals. Now, not that Tony still doesn't have that mentor role to offer Peter, but Peter's gained enough experience and, most importantly, enough respect that Tony is starting to see him as more of an equal. And one other thing that I do think should be noted is, and maybe this was mentioned earlier in some of the earlier episodes and I just forgot about it, but Peter specifically refers to Iron Man as an Avenger. Now, in the conversations I've had with some people about the previous episodes, particularly Homesick Hulk, we talked about the idea that maybe we were getting to see the first steps towards the Avengers being formed in the Ultimate Spider-Man universe. Well, I guess this must have slipped by. Maybe this is the first time it's been mentioned or whatever, but here we are confirmed that the Avengers in some form already exist. And apparently Peter is aware of them. Now, is this them being public figures, or if this is just something he's picked up from hanging around S.H.I.E.L.D., we don't know. But I think that's worth taking note of. it also sort of makes me wonder, we know Captain America exists, we know the Hulk exists, we know that Iron Man exists, and we know that Thor exists. Exists? Exists. Hmm. I'm having difficulty talking this evening. Maybe I had too much coffee earlier. But anyway, so that just makes me wonder, well, what other Avengers are out there that exist? And I do have to think it's only fair that to point out that in the comics, we already have two established Avengers on the show already, and that's of course Spider-Man and Luke Cage. I've heard that Iron Fist is going to be joining the Avengers, but I could be wrong on that. I'm really not paying too much attention to what's going on these days in the comics, simply because one, I don't download comics, and two, of course, I don't live in the U.S. or even in an English-speaking country, so getting my hands on comics is kind of a pain. But anyway, that's really not super relevant. But going back to the fight with the Iron Man controlled armor at Norman Osborn's place. First of all, I do have to say that when Norman whipped out like the dual minigun and started firing, you got to give it to the tech boys at Oscorp for creating a gun that big that has absolutely no recoil. I mean, seriously, that looked like double what Arnold Schwarzenegger was waving around in Terminator 2, and that was a freaking minigun. And one other thing that I do have to want to take note of is that during the fight, did you guys notice that Norman grabbed Harry and deliberately shielded Harry using his own body? And I like how not one word was said about this. It is entirely up to us, the viewers, to take notice of this and to, well, frankly, to take note of this incredible significance given the very back and forth way Norman has been on whether or not he cares about Harry. I mean, Harry burst into his office several episodes ago, obviously upset and freaked out on something, and honestly, if I can be so blunt, looking like he was probably on drugs, and Norman just blew him off. And interesting fact from the comics, Harry Osborn does indeed have a history of drug abuse. But we're obviously not going to be seeing this on Ultimate Spider-Man, but I just thought I'd throw that little piece of trivia out there. So the question of just how much does Norman care about Harry is something that's always been a little bit back and forth in this series. But here we're getting to see very unequivocally that whatever his shortcomings as a father may be, and being evil is pretty big on the list, Norman does genuinely care for Harry, and if it comes down to it, is willing to put his own life at risk in order to protect Harry. Which, if nothing else, says quite a bit about their relationship. It may be a strained relationship, but we can't deny that the two do care for each other. And however bad a father Norman might be, in protecting Harry that way, he showed that he still does have that core of parental love in his heart. Now, is this going to be touched upon in the future? Well, I can't imagine that it won't be. But is this going to be a redeeming factor for Norman? Is this going to be something that he can ultimately use to manipulate Harry? Because, love or not, Norman is a natural manipulator, as we've seen by his relationship with Doc Ock. So again, folks, that's something to keep an eye on. Now, let me see here. Moving on, let's talk a little bit about Peter's relationship with Tony. I do like the idea of Tony as a mentor to Peter. It's something that feels very natural. And also, I like the fact that it's a very interesting parallel between the two. They're in many ways very similar people, but they're also very, very opposite people. Tony, of course, comes from an extraordinarily wealthy family. Peter is a poor kid from Queens. Tony grew up, his mother died when he was young. He had a very strained relationship with his father. Peter's parents, they did die with his young, but when he was young, and interesting trivia fact, in the comics, Peter's 8 parents were actually SHIELD agents. But anyway, But he did have Aunt May and Uncle Ben, so Peter grew up in an extraordinarily loving and supportive environment. So, in a way, they both kind of grew up with having what the other really did want. And while this is never really touched on too awful much, I do like that. I do think that it's a subtle and interesting undercurrent to the Peter Parker Tony Stark relationship. Now, during the big fight at Tony's place, we get to see several instances of old timey Iron Man armor. The gray one, of course, being the first iteration of the Iron Man armor, coming up from all the way back in the 60s. The Iron Man armor with the nose, another armor from the 60s. I do like that. I'm really actually amazed they got away with this joke with Tony talking about having gone through an anatomical phase and then saying about how he almost put something on the Iron Man armor, and of course them cutting away to that. Um, I have to admit, I'm genuinely surprised they got away with what was almost certainly intended to be a dick joke on a show like this. Of course, you could always reason that he was in fact talking about perhaps the time when briefly the Iron Man armor had roller skates at the bottom of it, but that doesn't exactly fall under anatomical, does it? Yeah, the Iron Man armor at one point actually had roller skates. Interesting fact, Iceman and Kitty Pryde also dicked around on roller skates for a while. No, wait, not Kitty Pryde, Dazzler. Dazzler. Yeah, the 70s were a crazy time, people. Anyway, so we also, oh yeah, the big armor, I'm pretty sure, is the famous Hulkbuster armor from the Planet Hulk storyline in the Hulk comic books. That was some pretty badass stuff. If you ever have the chance to go out and read Planet Hulk, go do it. It's a really, really great Hulk story. And I'm sorry, that wouldn't be Planet Hulk. That would be World War Hulk. I'm sorry. World War Hulk, yeah, skip that one. It really wasn't all that great. But anyway, we also get to see that for sure the arc reactor exists here in the Marvel Universe. I understand why it's there. Obviously, the movies are the iteration of Iron Man that people know best. So, of course, the show's going to tap into that. I guess maybe just as a fan who comes in from the comics rather than the movies, I feel a little bothered that they're tapping that. And you know what? I know that's a completely irrational thing, because as I said, from a storytelling and a financial point of view, it makes perfect sense. But I guess I just like that for the most part, this show has been drawing very heavily from the comics far more than it has been from the movies. After all, our version of Thor is very much the comic book version of Thor rather than the movie version of Thor. Now, not that there's anything wrong with either version of the character. I like the Thor movie, I like movie Thor, and I also like comic book Thor. But again, it's just I feel a stronger emotional connection to the comic book incarnations of these characters. So that is ultimately what I prefer to see the show draw from. Now, one thing that I do like that we get to see here that tragically has never really been played up as much as I think it really should have been in the comics is the rivalry between Tony Stark and Norman Osborn. Now, this is something that's, as I said, occasionally has popped up in the comics. It's actually established that both Tony Stark and Norman Osborn are members of the New York branch of the Hellfire Club from the X-Men comics. Now, they're just more, I believe, intended to be normal members rather than the guys who go out and, of course, like fight the X-Men and try and take over the world. The Hellfire Club is, of course, made up of numerous people from, the high levels of business and politics, who mostly just go there to get, boozed up and do incredibly immoral things outside of the public eye. Sort of like if you've ever heard of Bohemian Grove out in California, which is the subject of many, many very bizarre conspiracy theories floating around on the internet. Seriously, just like throw Bohemian Grove into Google and you'll come up with all kinds of really crazy stuff. But anyway, I do hope that we get to see more of that, because if you stop and think about it, really, like all the big time business people who are characters in the Marvel Universe, both good guys and bad, you'd think they would constantly be butting heads with each other. But it's something that only really very rarely happens. And to me, that always has just seemed like an incredible waste of story potential. So I did like that. Now, moving on to the stuff that happens on the helicarrier. Now, I do like the way that Doc Ock is really presented here. In many ways, he is presented as a very tragic character. Norman Osborn, was basically did save his life, and if you remember the very early episodes, he even basically flat out says that if Octavius doesn't perform, he's going to have him killed. So at the end of it all, Doc Ock is really a victim here. He didn't ask to be in the lab accident that fused those arms to his body. He didn't ask for Norman Osborn to essentially enslave him. And he didn't ask for just anything that's really happened to him. He's just a guy who really has suffered so horribly, and Norman Osborn is abusing him and then telling him that he should be grateful for it. I mean, no wonder he's gone crazy and is basically trying to kill Norman and doesn't much care if he kills an innocent kid like Harry or anybody else who gets in his way. He is the monster that Norman Osborn has made him. Now, not that Doc Ock isn't responsible for the choices that he's made. We are all ultimately responsible for our choices in life. But, again, it is not unfair to say that if Norman Osborn hadn't done these things to him, if Norman Osborn hadn't used him, treated him like a commodity, that he would have been driven to do these things. It's the tragedy of, people just simply thinking that it's all right to use other people as objects, as things. But anyway, going back to the stuff on the helicarrier. While it was a really great fight, I do have to make some very noticeable complaints about what's going on here. Okay, first of all, Doc Ock is attacking the SHIELD helicarrier. This is the SHIELD helicarrier that several episodes ago was attacked by Zodiac, and that just the other week was attacked by warriors from Asgard. It is a place that has been routinely attacked by bad guys from the outside. So how is it that within seconds of showing up, there weren't dozens of armed, highly trained SHIELD agents showing up to help Spider-Man and Iron Man take Doc Ock down? Seriously, they should have been like 20 guys there in about 10 seconds, armed to the teeth. And, dude, Nick Fury, you're standing right there. You seriously mean to tell me that you can't contribute to this battle in any way, shape, or form? Why the hell are you the head of SHIELD then? And of course the answer to all of this is the story demands that that Iron Man and Spider-Man fight Doc Ock. And while that's great from a storytelling context, it's still kind of stupid if you apply even the most basic logic to what's happening in that scene. And again, there's a certain amount of stuff that happens that I'm willing to hand wave as just necessary to storytelling. But this is really inching over the line to a more than a little bit. Let's put it that way. But, SHIELD is exactly as competent as the story needs them to be. Now, I did like that they did say, they did not forget to say, well, why don't we go get the Amazing Friends to help us take down Doc Ock? And they do acknowledge that, well, that is an option, but, we just don't have time to do this. So I do like that they at least address that. Let me see here. I did like that at the very end, Peter did point out to Tony that keeping the activation codes to his armor in the computers was a really stupid idea. And, let me try this again. Yes, that is dumb. On the other hand, you don't want your heroes to be flawless. You want them to make mistakes. The difference between good writing and bad writing in that regard is whether or not the characters make understandable mistakes or if they make stupid mistakes. The best example of this I ever have seen was when I was watching the commentary to an episode of Angel. And basically, in the episode, Angel is, running off to go and take down some bad guys, and he hops in his car, his cool '60s convertible of some sort, the model of which I don't quite remember, and he tries to start it up, and it doesn't work. And then he stops and realizes, wait a minute, this isn't my car. There was another car very similar to his, parked almost in exactly the same spot, and he got into it by mistake. And so, of course, Angel gets out of the car and he goes to his real car and he goes off to fight the bad guys. And the writer of this episode basically says, you see, that's a realistic mistake. That's a mistake that could honestly see Angel making because, well, I think if you own a car, you've probably done the exact same thing. You've probably gone up to some car in a parking lot, tried to get into it, only to realize, wait a second, this isn't my car. My car is over there. And of course, you kind of, if you're like me when that's happened, you just sort of walk away feeling embarrassed and stupid. But again, that's a realistic mistake. That's a mistake that Angel could honestly make. And as dumb as it is, that's a mistake I can kind of see Tony making. He is a guy who's arrogant enough to think that under most circumstances, virtually nobody else on the planet could ever break into his systems like that. And, a lot of people do indeed keep important information on their computers. It's just a fact of life. Now, of course, Tony is also smart enough not to keep everything on his computer. Yeah, free advice, folks. Don't do that. But I do like that. It is a believable error because while Tony is a very talented guy, he is most certainly not a terribly humble person. And hubris has led to people making far greater mistakes than anything that we see in this episode. Now, one other thing that I want to point out in this episode, and this is something I've seen in more than a few other superhero shows, and it always really bothers me. At the very end, we see Spider-Man and Spider-Man basically knock Doc Ock through two office buildings. Two office buildings in the middle of New York in what appears to be sometime during the evening. Now, how in the world he was able to do that without possibly killing somebody is really just beyond me. I mean, if somebody in those buildings just happened to be working late, or if the janitor or a security guard was passing through those parts of the building, then Peter would have been guilty of involuntary manslaughter. And yeah, I mean, that's just, superheroes really should not do that. I mean, while he was certainly fighting Doc Ock, there was no way in the world that those buildings had officially been evacuated by the authorities. So if nobody's dead, it's just because of dumb luck on Peter's part. Again, that is just incredibly reckless behavior on the parts of superheroes, and I really, really hate seeing that. But anyway, overall, I do have to say that this was a pretty darn good episode. I really do like the way what they're doing with Iron Man in this episode, and Adrian Pasdor is absolutely fantastic as Tony Stark. I think he's one of the best casting choices for Marvel animation in a long, long time. He is just absolutely perfectly suited to do the voice of Tony. Tom Kenny really, really just absolutely brought Dr. Octopus this episode. And the writing, this version of Dr. Octopus is an incredibly, at least in this episode, a very sympathetic villain. I do like this take on Doc Ock. Very reminiscent, of course, of Spider-Man 2, where we see him essentially as a good person who was driven to do terrible things by forces that were very beyond his control. And, of course, we really get to see some more development of Norman Osborn as a character. I don't think it's going to be too much of a risk for me to predict that Norman and possibly the Green Goblin will be playing a significant role in the series finale. I mean, sorry, season finale that we're building up to her. I think we've got 4 more episodes left. So definitely something to look forward to. Hopefully, the Amazing Friends will be back next episode. Really kind of felt that their absence here. I think we do need to be seeing more of them, to really be focusing in on them, to kind of get some more character from them before this season wraps up. But anyway, folks, with that said, please comment, rate, and subscribe. And of course, you can follow me on Twitter at Hoosier Jedi. As I have reminded folks in some of my more recent videos, as soon as I do a video and as soon as it finishes uploading, I immediately send it out on Twitter. So if you want to be able to see these videos as soon as humanly possible, then following me there is the best way to do it. So until next time, folks, take care and have a good one.